I really would love it if I didn't hear talking when I am, because then I don't have to talk so loudly. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, because I know sometimes you're just asking a question. So we've already talked about we're right now in radiant energy. That is our current topic of energy, and we're still on it. We already did irradiation, which we talked about in detail about what happens, but we also said that that is more of a commercial, right? A way of making food safe. Now we're quickly going to talk about radiant energy. We're still on radiant, microwave energy. And this is something that is much more common and probably the most common way of cooking in this country at the home front. So here's what happens, is these microwaves, they hit the food. They hit food particles. And if I had time, this would be fun. I would make you, in fact, come up here, Kinsey, Pamela, quickly. Okay, let's get in a row. Okay, Pamela, I want you to shove Kinsey. All right. Go ahead. Now, that's a bad idea. Now, thank you, sit. Wasn't that great? Okay. Pamela did not hit me, did she? But what happened when she hit someone who was close to me? That is exactly what happens in the microwave. These particles are hit, and they in turn hit another. And now there's just hitting going all over. It's a big fight fest. Okay? Brad Pitt's not there, but it's a fight fest. All right. There was a time when that cultural reference would have really resonated. You guys not Fight Club? Nobody? All right, never mind. All right, so they hit these food particles, they in turn hit others, and we get this sort of friction. And friction, as you all know, causes heat. Movement, hitting each other, so we get a heat generation. And so all of a sudden, we have conduction occurring, which is our next type of heat. But conduction is exactly what its name says. Conduct, meaning we're spreading energy throughout something. So we're heating. If food particles are hit themselves, they're generating heat here. So this is one type of heat. And then in turn, the food, as it gets hotter and hotter, it's conducting this heat throughout the food. So microwave really has two types of heat going on, doesn't it? Two types. And that is why in microwave directions, if you ever read them, most of us don't read them anymore, there's usually a stand. Isn't that what I call some sort of stand? I wrote it down, standing. There's usually a standing time. That is, heat for 4 minutes, let's sit for 2. You know what I'm talking about? And if you get impatient, you're like, I'm not going to let it sit for 2. It's done. And you unwrap it. It's not quite done yet, is it? So then you say, well, it says stand for 2, but I'm going to microwave for 5 and be done. Well, then your food comes out all tough, doesn't it? So in the calculations that someone has done of the cooking time for that product, they have calculated this standing time that is caused by this. So they are asking you to allow the food to continue to cook through conduction after it's out of the microwave or sitting in the microwave. And this is extremely important. In fact, do you ever defrost? Does anyone ever defrost using their microwave? Do you notice that it has, why can't you just defrost for 5 minutes and don't even say defrost? Do you notice it has a separate setting for defrost? This is why. This is why. And if you ever defrost something, let's say you're going to defrost for 5 minutes, and you hook it up. Could you put your phone away? Thank you. Unless you're checking on a child or grandmother or whatever. All right, so let's say that you're defrosting, and you're defrosting a put of meat, a thing of steak. And you hear it. You hear your microwave going, yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about? If you've ever defrosted, it has this rising and falling almost. It is doing the standing time. It is using the radiant energy, and then it's allowing the conduction to work. And then radiant energy, and then conduction. It is taking into account what happens when you microwave. And so it doesn't want your meat to come out already cooked or rough, or tough, I should say, rough. That's what's happening. Your microwave is doing the standing time for you for defrost. So you don't have to sit there and go defrost 30 seconds, off 30 seconds, defrost 30 seconds, off 30 seconds. That's what you would have to do if it didn't have the built-in standing time. So I recommend if you are going to defrost from now on, use your defroster and listen, and you'll see that it's much more efficient and your meat comes out, or whatever comes out, not tough. What are some of the disadvantages? And remember, I told you to make that chart, advantages and disadvantages. What are the advantages of microwave cooking? Number one, time. It's time, isn't it? I mean, baked potatoes are a common thing now. You can have that in 5 minutes, depending on the size of the potato. In Texas, you have potatoes this big. You know, it takes you 10 minutes for one of those suckers. But to bake a potato will take an hour. So the time is huge. That's the big advantage. What is one of the disadvantages of the microwave? Excuse me?
Like no browning on the outside.
So there's no browning. Exactly right. And when microwaves first came around when I was like in college, it was like, ooh, that's microwave? I'm not going to eat that. You microwave the bacon? Ooh. It comes out looking like raw bacon, even though it's crisp. So there's no browning, because where do we get browning? We talked about it earlier, the broiling. The radiant energy that comes from broiling. So that is the drawback. That's why certain pans and foils have been created to create a browning effect on your food. So from an organoleptic perspective, it's much more palatable. What does organoleptic mean again? The senses, exactly right, the senses. And most of us, if we're eating bacon, even if it tastes like bacon or looks like bacon, or excuse me, smells like bacon and feels like bacon, if it looks raw, if it's totally red or translucent and white, most of us aren't going to eat it. We're going to be uncomfortable with it. Very, very important. So essentially what we just talked about is, I wrote this down, I thought this was important. Heat, we're talking about heat on the surface, heat on surface, and these are the two types of radiation, versus heat within food. And so heat on the surface is the irradiation or the broiling, and the heat within food is the microwaving type of energy. All right, then we're off of radiant energy, and we're moving on. It's kind of cool, it helps me stand up too. The next one we're going to talk about is what we call induction. I personally can't stand induction. I have friends who have induction stoves, and I just can't stand it. You've got a first conductor of heat, and this first conductor is a high frequency. Again, high frequency. Is that okay if I abbreviate frequency like that? Yeah. On my student evaluations, one of the only negative comments I got was I used too many abbreviations. So please let me know if you don't understand them. Okay, I would love to share them with you, and you can ask me again and again. I don't want this to screw up your notes. Okay, so the high frequency abbreviation of alternating current. That's what AC is. You know, AC/DC. Again, culturally, that was a huge group when I was in college. Do you guys even know who AC/DC is? Highway to Hell, that kind of thing. All right. Anyway, all right, so alternating current through the coils. And I know I've spelled through wrong. I'm just using that as an abbreviation, all right? Okay, so have any of you seen the induction stovetops? And there you see the coil, it's a flat glass surface. My daughter has one. And there's the coils underneath, right? And they are actually sending a high frequency AC, alternating current, through those coils that then generates a magnetic field. Okay, so this generates a magnetic field. A magnetic field that then is going to interact with, it's going to act upon the second conductor. And if I'm using a magnetic field, well then clearly something magnetic has got to be the second conductor. And the second conductor is going to be the metal pan that's sitting on this coil. And it's got to be made from some type of ferrous what do they call it? Ferromagnet, thank you. I'm still in the vitamins. Ferromagnetic, or it could just be iron. And the reason that we have to use something that's ferromagnetic is because iron is a terrible conductor of heat. So therefore, what's it going to do with the heat that it receives? It's going to hold it. It's going to hold it. It's not going to conduct it. It's going to hold it. It's not going to let go. It's going to hold. It's not going to be free. It's going to be trapped. All right, so this trapped heat then, that's the second conductor, it's going to then heat the food through conduction. So once again, even induction uses conduction, which is the passing of heat through the food. We're going to get a better explanation of that in just one second. Yes, sir, you had a question.
Are stoves have to be one foot or sort of brick glass and it turns red and you heat it?
Yes, sir. That's it. That's exactly it. Here we go. Yes, it is definitely an electric stove. It requires an alternating current. So that is electric. Yes, ma'am.
And the purpose of it being a bad conductor is so that I can stay there for longer.
Yes, exactly right. Which is why even heat, like copper pans, same thing. We want those pans to hold the heat, not pass it off, right? What would be the point of taking in heat and then passing it off into the atmosphere? Or heating your house? No, I'm serious. And in fact, I had a professor at UC Davis who's famous, Dr. Calvert, who used to give the lecture in advanced metabolism, and he would say the one wasteful thing the human body does is give off heat. Because in a closed system, everything should be contained. There should be a zero loss of energy. And we give off heat, which I'm kind of glad we give off heat, right? But that is the one wasteful thing from a machine perspective. It's the one wasteful thing we do. Well, these metal pans don't give it off, they hold it. And therefore, they heat anything that touches them. And then that is hot, and it in turn heats the thing that's next to it. It's sort of like if we heated up Kinsey, and she's like the hot student right there. She would be heating the guy behind her. What's your name? Hamilton? Dude, have you seen this musical? You have? Oh my gosh, can I know you? Okay, so cool. I so want to see that. Anyway, all right, so she's heating Hamilton and she's heating Pamela. And now Hamilton is heating, what? Hannah. He's sending Getty, and Hannah in turn is sending heat along that way. And none of them touched Kinsey. It was sort of that friction I showed you. It's the same thing with this heat conduction. So the induction, one of the good things about it is it gets hot so fast, y'all. I mean, when I turn it on at my daughter's house, I'm cooking, it's like, woo, water is boiling, right? But the downside is that it takes quite a while to cool off. And so therefore, there's this it has to have a little monitor on it that even when things are off, it reads hot to warn you, because it looks like it's totally just a glass surface. So there's a lot of danger, especially with children in the house, of somebody touching that and there being a burn. Okay, so that's one of the drawbacks of it. Moving on now to, so if radiant energy was the first one, then induction energy was the second. Now we're moving on to the third. Finally, we're going to talk about, that gives me such a feeling of power to hear it slam like that. Okay, conduction. Now we're to the conduction energy. And the conduction energy clearly has been involved already in the first two. But the official definition of conduction, and there isn't you can think of it as heat transfer. And this basically is thermal energy clearly that means temporal. There's a temporal element. Thermal energy that is transferred directly from the heat cooking in a pan. And that's why the material of the pan you're using is so important. It needs to be something that holds heat, that then the food around it is getting hot, and then it starts spreading its heatness. Okay, it's love and joy through heat. And this is how, if the pan is hot, the food is hot. But knowing this, let's think, so the advantage is that it's a direct heat, and it's very controllable from that perspective. It's the one we're most familiar with, and it's easy to do. But some of the disadvantages is, what can you think of? What does the food heat evenly? In other words, the food that is touching the pan, do you think it's getting hotter than the food in the very center or at the top? Have you ever had food that if you burn it, it's the bottom of the pan that burns? This is why. This is why. The food that's actually touching the metal is going to get hotter faster and stay hotter than the food in the center. Okay, so the food heats unevenly. I would call this a disadvantage. That's why when you're cooking using conduction, what do you always recommend to do? And you're recommended to scrape the bottom of the pot, because that food is getting hotter than any other. Okay, this one also there's some energy wasted. Again, in a closed system, we try not to waste energy, but energy is wasted because of the air near the pan. There's air around the pan that is getting heated as well. That's wasted energy. If there was some type of pan that we could have that actually conducted only one way, you guys, you can invent that. A pan that has a shell and the inside is ferromagnetic. Now, it would have to be something that allowed heat to get through just to the inside. You guys are the big brains, though. Think about it. One of you in here could invent something like that. Wouldn't that be a wonderful? Food would heat twice as fast. But that is one of the disadvantages, is the lost, okay? Inconsistent heating, energy wasted, and time. It takes more time to heat everything through, from molecule to molecule. But that's why you are asked to stir. And you know, your book has got some great figures. I'm sure you've looked at it, like 3.2 and 3.3. They actually have figures of a pan, and they show you with arrows how the heat is being transmitted. And I think it's interesting. It may seem simplistic to you, but we're going to build on these concepts. So you need to get these basic steps so that when we build upon them, you remember, oh yeah, that's convection. Oh yeah, that's radiation. Oh no, that's conduction. All right, so that's pretty important. So one of the reasons these disadvantages I've listed here has led to the development of very specialized equipment. Think your mom or your dad or somebody in your family or someone you know that loves to cook, and they've got very special, expensive pans, don't they? Because they use a very special, expensive metal. If you go to Target and you buy a big box of the pans and it's really inexpensive, you get the kind of, that's fine, they work, but you're going to notice that certain parts of the pan, certain things get hotter than others. And when you wash it, you notice on the bottom that you start seeing little spots. You start seeing uneven or discoloration. That shows an uneven metal distribution. So therefore, when you see those pots in your pan on the bottom that look like, you know, they're discolored, that's a cold spot. So food that is sitting right there, there's going to be less conduction. And stirring becomes even more and more important. Haven't you ever had a pan, or even if you cook in an oven, have you ever had a pan that just doesn't seem to cook evenly? That's what people are talking about. They're talking about whether you've got specialized equipment. If you've got the thin pan, if you've got the thin metal, your foods are going to scorch. Your foods are going to scorch more easily. So if you've got the cheaper stuff, you need to make sure that you are scraping the bottom. your tomato soup is gonna scorch. You know what I mean? How many of you had to scrub the bottom of a pan? How many of you have thrown away a pan? You've given up on it after a certain cooking incident. You say, oh, screw this, I'm not cleaning this, I'm throwing it away. We've all done that. I've done that numerous times. And those pans, it's because of that thin metal, the sort of inexpensive distribution. But that's why aluminum and cast iron, or like copper, really expensive, those are some of the best cookware. The stainless steel that you're buying at Target and those things, that stuff is the one that starts developing hot spots and cold spots. And they don't cook evenly. I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying be aware of it, all right? All right, moving on. Whew. Convection. And so if conduction was, what number was conduction? 3? This one is 4. The convection, we're still talking about energy and food. And the definition of this one is when currents of air are created. That's basically what we're doing. We're looking at currents heating the food. And the way that this happens is that the air or liquid is heated. This leads to currents of hot air or liquid that develop and then they spread the heat energy as a current. The advantage of this is that it happens much more rapidly than conduction. You can think of this as circulation. Of heat. Circulation of heat. So think of it as in your apartment or in your dorm room, and it's hot and there's no AC. Which bunk is going to be hotter, the top or the bottom? Why is the top bunk going to be hotter? Because cold air sinks, hot air rises. Bang, you've just defined convection. That's exactly the principle that's at work here. The hot air, the air being heated, right, is going to rise. And it's going to mingle with the cooler air at the top. That cooler air at the top is going to in turn sink, but as it heats, as it's moving down, it's going to be heating the cooler air it passes through. And all of a sudden, you have developed a current. You have developed a pressure gradient. I used to be married to a meteorologist. I can't help but think about this kind of stuff. Okay, so in fact, he's a hurricane hunter in Jacksonville, Florida. He's still on the air there too, so it's kind of fun if you want to look up Tim Deegan. He's there. But anyway, I know it's funny, isn't it? But anyway, so here I am talking about hot air rising and low air, and it's funny to me because he'd be putting some words. Isotherm, that's what he'd call it. Isobar. It's an isobar. Anyway, so these convection ovens move very quickly, and in fact, when you're in a pan and you're heating and the conduction is entering the food, you're creating convection. So even when you're cooking tomato soup, I always use that because that's my go-to soup. That's my warm, fuzzy soup when I'm not feeling so great. With saltines sprinkled in it, you know what I'm talking about? Or little fishies, little oyster cracker. Okay. Anyway, so I'm heating tomato soup, and it's heating the outside and the bottom, right? And as it's doing so, it is applying conduction, but this air, as it's doing it, this liquid, that same process is happening. The cold stuff is sinking, and the hot stuff is rising. So now, even in a conduction pan, you've got currents going on. And if you have holes in your pan, like hot spots and cold spots, those currents are whacking out in there. It's a very irregular air system in there. That's another reason that you should be stirring really well, because you're gonna have food that gets really hot, and like if you're making hot chocolate and you notice certain parts have a skim on it, like all of a sudden, why is this part skimming? You know what I mean by skin? And that the rest of it isn't. That's because you've got hot spots or cold spots. In an oven, it's really, really important that you allow those currents to exist. And that's the type of cooking that occurs in an oven, is convection. So if you're cooking and you stack pans one on top of the other and they're close together, do you think they're going to cook evenly? Absolutely not. So one of the things that we're taught, you'll be taught in this course, and especially in lab when we get to baking, is that you need to be very careful where you put your pans when you're cooking. Because this convection has to occur, these currents have to occur. From the heating that's coming out, it's creating currents. And you want those currents to impact your fruit, your cookies, evenly, right? Hey lab, you know what, people in lab, we're making cookies next week. I say we make enough to bring to class. What do you think? What do you think, class? You want some cookies? All right. Or fudge. Would you prefer fudge or cookies? I guess we're going to have to bring both then. All right. Okay, so another thing about convection is as it does promote browning. That's another advantage. You have browning that occurs, which is what you want. The higher the temperature, the more browning you're going to have, because the longer time food spends at a higher temperature, the more the sugar is going to migrate to the outside, and that's what browning is. And we'll talk about the browning or the Maillard reaction as we get more into this. So what we're talking about so far is one vocabulary word I want to throw in here is mass transfer. And mass transfer is this movement of a food component into or out of a food being heated. Movement of a food component into or out of a food that is being heated. That is mass transfer. Basically, what food component are we talking about that reacts to heat more than any other? Water. We're talking about water. You're right about sugar, but it's the water on the sugar. Remember, sugar is carbohydrate. It's got the H2O on it. So it's the movement of water, basically. But we say any component because there are going to be some other ones. But it's the movement in or out, and that's called mass transfer. And it's moving because of heat. Okay? All right. So that's our heat portion. Now I'm going to talk about states of matter. We're moving on to a totally different topic in this same chapter. And that is states of matter. And you already know all of them. So it shouldn't be too hard. Tell me what they are. Solid. Then what?
Liquid.
Liquid. And gas. And if you're a physicist or an atomic or molecular biologist, you probably could add another state or two. All right? But in this class, we're just doing these 3 states of matter, okay? And basically, the states of matter are defined by how well they flow. So, solids. Do they flow well?
No.
No. They have a low flow. And therefore, that really means they are the lowest energy. They are the lowest energy of all of the states of matter. Now, solids will flow. Some of them more than others, under stress. Can anyone think of something that looks like it's a solid, and it is a solid, but it has one of the highest flow patterns of any solid? Glass. Glass is flowing, my friends. Glass is flowing. Is that amazing? And the better the glass, the more dense it is, the more solid it is, more tightly packed, the lower energy, the less it's going to flow and the longer it's going to last. But that is why glass, as it gets older, will crack and break. It is flowing. I know that sounds whack, but it is. All right. And the way the solids are organized, whether they're crystalline or organic or whatever, can make a big difference too. Liquid. Liquid does have flow. It does exhibit flow properties. Surprise there. Y'all, are you listening? Liquid has flow properties?
I noticed.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And therefore, it's got the medium energy. It's the second highest energy. Clearly, we're building up to gas having the highest energy of these three states of matters. The thing that allows for cohesion, we're going to call this cohesion in the liquid, is the attraction between, B/T is between molecules. Okay? This attraction between molecules. So would you say that all liquids have the same flow pattern or cohesion? No. Clearly, depending on the liquid and how polar it is, and most liquids are polar, but some are not, is going to impact this flow pattern. Another thing that has a big impact is the temperature. The temperature. The temperature of a liquid is important because if some of the matters, if you heat them, what's going to happen to a liquid? Most liquids. What is going to happen if you heat them? What's going to happen? You're going to lose water, aren't you? And what's water loss? Evaporation. Evaporation. And this evaporation is going to result in a lower volume. So evaporation is the escape of liquid molecules into the atmosphere. Did you know that? You could define that on an exam. You could pick that out without even writing that down. Evaporation is the escape of molecules into the atmosphere. Right? That is evaporation. Do those molecules disappear?
No.
They are in our atmosphere. They are there. Right? And those things you smell, that is liquid molecules that have evaporated and escaped into the air. Holy cow, you guys are so much fun. I promised I was going to give the last 5 minutes of questions about anything you wanted. We'll do that